Episode 3 of the Hangin with Lee podcast is going to be a book report on the inner game of tennis, the classic guide to the mental side of peak performance, with a foreword by Pete Carroll. It's written by Timothy Gallwey. Hopefully I said the name right. And this one's going to be a fun one. This is one that I read about 4 years ago and something that recently popped into my head as I was recording the previous 2 podcasts. Not that I don't think that they went well, but obviously they'll keep getting better as I keep going, I hope. But one of the things that popped into my head was trying produces negative results. And as I looked back on my notes that I took from the inner game of tennis when I read this 4 years ago, I wrote on a 3x5 note card, very, very small, maybe like size 3 fonts, very fine point pen. I wrote that almost to a T, that trying often produces negative results, which is a concept that I'll talk about with the inner game of tennis. This book is probably about an hour and a half read, pretty thin, pretty short, quick chapters. I'm not a particularly fast reader, but with that said, it was a quick read for me. I think I read the whole thing in about a day and a half. And there were a lot of points in the book that I put it down, and then you sit there and start thinking like, man, that's me 10 years ago, or that's me at a certain point in my life. And really, if I could do anything with this book, I would go back and give it to myself at age 13, 14. Only because at that time I was really, really hyper-focused on becoming a better athlete and better baseball player. And this was something that I feel like would have helped me a lot, be able to not only handle success, but handle failure. A lot of sports and a lot of things in life aren't necessarily about how well you can perform and how great you are. It's how much can you bounce back from setbacks. And one thing that I admittedly was not very good at that time was bouncing back from anything that I thought was a negative result. So very impactful. Recommended to me by a friend named Serge. If you're listening, thank you. I'll send this to you. But I didn't read it for like 2 years after you recommended it to me, and I should have read it that night. So you were right, and thank you, buddy. I have a playoff baseball game tomorrow night for a men's baseball league that I'm in. It's a championship game, so that's exciting. And I think this is a little bit more top of the mind because I am about to go play in a championship do or die game tomorrow night. So with that said, there's been some things kind of going in my mind, how I'm conceptually looking at competition and trying not to over intellectualize it. But the main concept of the inner game of tennis is talking about the relationship between self one and self two. So self one is the teller, the conscious, the ego, the part of us that gives instructions. And then self two is the unconscious, the doer, the executor, the part of us that just goes out and performs. And really the whole point of the book is to talk about the relationship between self one and self two, and how peak performance happens when we can get self one to quiet down and allow self two, which is a miracle and can't be improved upon from life and birth to death, just allowing self one to get out of the way of self two. So if you know anyone who can't get out of their own way, or from between the ears, they need a checkup from the neck up, like whatever you want to use as an expression. This is definitely a book that I would recommend they stop whatever they're doing and read. So with that said, the equation that they don't necessarily talk about explicitly within this book, but I believe they've built like a set of courses and curriculum and certifications around the inner game. It talks about the performance equation. So your potential to perform equals, your performance equals your potential minus interference. So I'll say it again so I don't butcher it this time. Performance equals potential minus interference. Performance, your ability to actually go out and do the thing, is based on how good you could possibly be minus how much you get out of your own way. So, staying out of your own way is important, and really, as you start to move up, whether it's in sport, business, life, anything, really getting out of your own way and allowing your natural abilities to express is a really, really important, I say the most important thing that's going to differentiate people within levels of success or competency or performance, however you want to kind of look at that. So I started playing golf about 4 years ago just for fun, and a lot of my, progress through the game of golf has really been fun because I've been able to not put too much pressure on myself and just enjoy the game and really focus on using golf as a way for me to learn how I learn and learn my tendencies and learn my habits rather than me trying to improve my mental game for the sake of improving my golf game. Like I'm using golf to improve myself and improve my inner game, and that might be a kind of crazy thing to think, but there have been times where I'm like ready to throw a club or ready to kind of lose my cool a little bit, and I remind myself why I'm out there, and it's to try to stay out of my own way and to practice that and to use it as like a meditation almost, and to keep it fun. So there's only a few things that I really want to share from this book. I recommend everybody get a copy of it. It's definitely the most gifted book I've ever gifted. It's the book I've given to the most people as a gift. A lot of high school and college athletes, and then a lot of just adult friends. I've bought copies for my dad, for a lot of friends, just people that are interested in this. It's at points a really, really spiritual read. But with that said, I'll get into a couple of the things that I've really gotten the most out of it from. Like I'd mentioned, I gave a copy to my dad. I've talked about it with other people that coach. My dad coached me a lot when I was a kid, but really anybody who coaches, any sort of high school sport or youth sport or adult level sport that has to work with people, even bosses, managers, anything like that. I think it's really, really important to understand how people that you're going to work with learn and what the natural learning process looks like. And a few things from the author's perspective in coaching tennis lessons. I knew I was eventually going to get back to tennis. He was a tennis player and then turned into a head tennis pro at a country club, and then also worked in academia teaching just natural learning methods. So with that, a few of the things that he really started to dive into were just the concept of images being better than words, that showing was better than telling, that giving too many instructions was often like much worse than giving no instructions at all, and that like I said at the beginning of this, that the trying often produces negative results. You could think of trying as like self-one, like really, really trying to force a certain result and to get a certain outcome, and then by doing that, by trying, putting pressure and interfering with self-two's natural ability to just go out and do it. The thing that has stuck in my head the most from this book, the one part, is that the toddler would take longer to learn how to walk if it was given instructions. So think about like a parent trying to teach a baby how to walk. Like that's not how a baby learns. Like they don't have the vocabulary. But like what are you going to do? Tell it to stand up and then put its right foot in front and swing the left arm forward, and then at the other time you're going to like that's not how it happens. A baby sees everybody experiencing life standing up, and then it tries to do the same thing. It tries to grab and pull itself upright. Then it tries to start putting its feet out in front of itself while it leans forward, and then it falls. And it doesn't judge itself for falling. It just thinks about what it did and then tries again. That's essentially how you have to approach any sort of learning. Anything that you're trying to either learn how to do for the first time, or maybe a trait or a quality or a skill that you had at one point that you then lost. You have to look at it as trying to learn how to walk again. Toddler doesn't get mad at himself or herself for not knowing how to walk properly the first time it does it. So you can't get frustrated. You have to just continue on and allow self to express and show up. And it talks about groove theory in the book. Groove theory is, I have notes here, so I might as well just read them. Groove theory is basically letting go of judgment, but then also just having non-judgmental observation of whatever outcome that you just had, and then picturing the desired outcome, trusting self to, and then making the appropriate adjustment or change, and then repeating that process. So again, non-judgmental observation of the change in results. So just keep going. So observe, then picture a better desired outcome, and then trust self to. So getting out of the way. You can apply that to anything in sport. You're about to hit a golf shot. Visualize where it's going to go. Take a swing. Okay, it doesn't go where you wanted it to. Okay, repeat the process. Do it again. If you're on the practice range, obviously that it makes sense there. Or if you're on the course and it's in the middle of a round, put it in the database in your head and keep going. Just an example there. I know the book's about tennis, but you can hit Control F and replace all for tennis racket and put in golf club, and it pretty much reads as the same thing. And that's not to take anything away from the game of tennis. That's not to take anything away from the author. He says that pretty explicitly within the book. It's about learning. It's not about tennis itself, which may be one reason why I didn't read it when I was younger, or maybe it never came across my radar just because it said tennis in it, and I was like, oh, I'm not a tennis player, so what am I going to do? Read this? So there's one thing there. Trusting self too, and just letting it happen. It's definitely a self two process, and then whenever self one steps in and tries to make it happen, that's when like the tightening up of muscles happen. Things become rigid. They're not just like allowing things to play out. So for me, there's really, in these moments that I do, find myself in competition, whether it's, standing over a putt or standing over something in a golf game, or playing something that's a little bit faster from a reaction, less thinking standpoint like baseball, which obviously there's a lot of thinking and mental side of baseball too. But it's me figuring out, okay, how do I allow myself to just be present here and to not put too much on this moment and trust that, the hundreds and thousands of repetitions that I took when I was younger are, innately within me now and are just second nature. And all I have to do is allow that correct headspace to show up, where the loud part of self one that may be like, hey, the last time, you saw this pitch, you did this to it. Like, it just quiets that, and it allows me to just show up and, be an athlete, let the instincts kind of come out, whatever level of athleticism I currently have. The story that I kind of went into about the toddler learning how to walk, just to reiterate this, the toddler doesn't get down on him or herself, but it uses images to then create the mental picture of, hey, what is it that I want to do? Well, I want to walk successfully. And then it just keeps trying until it gets it. Another thing that is great is when I used to coach, this talks about discovering technique. So when I was coaching baseball, specifically like teaching hitting, there's a lot of technique and different things involved with that need to be acquired. And it talks about the difference between technical instruction versus awareness instruction. So technical instruction would be, let's just say we want someone to swing the bat and not have their back shoulder like drop way down because they keep hitting pop-ups. Rather than me saying, hey, stop dropping your back shoulder and using negative words, or hey, keep your back shoulder up, which again is a technical instruction. It's talking about that body part and giving it a specific instruction, which would be like me as self one telling them, self one or self two, hey, do this. The way to approach that from an awareness instruction standpoint would be to use words like, well, I want you to feel what your shoulders feel like at the moment that you start your swing. Or I want you to observe what your shoulders feel like when you're about to make contact with the ball. Or I want you to notice, or I want you to sense. Using words that call awareness to a certain area rather than giving a specific instruction can then lead to a process of learning that's, hey, I wonder what, I do wonder what it feels like. I guess I wasn't aware of that part of the body. And then it can become a simple instruction for them to then create for themselves of, hey, I want to have awareness of this feeling this way, and then they can dial it in rather than maybe them not even be ready to receive it and you just yelling at them and saying, hey, do it this way. Not even yelling at them, but giving an instruction that may not necessarily land. When there's awareness instruction, there starts to naturally be a line of questioning within somebody's head. It's like, hey, how am I doing this? Like, what does this actually feel like? And then once there's awareness there, then they could either create the technical instruction for themselves, which could lead to self one interfering down the road with self two, or there could just be a more general awareness of that, and correction can be made. So big thing is discovering technique and really understanding the awareness instruction cues, and it's something that's changed a lot of how I instruct and how I kind of talk to myself too, which is another thing. I reread. When you reread any book at any point in your life, you're always a different person. And one thing that when I picked up Inner Game a few months ago, I was at the beach and I just flipped it open and I was like, all right, I'm going to read a chapter. I think I read 3 sentences, and one of the last sentence that I read was talking about how a player was getting mad at themselves on the court, and the question basically would have been like, hey, what are you doing? Because they're yelling. And their response was, I'm just yelling at myself, which if you really break that down, I'm just yelling at myself. That right away indicates like a cleavage or a separation of personalities. Like, yes, there are two selves. There's self one, there's self two. But the point really is to let self two be the one that shows up. When you talk about like, I'm yelling at myself, I would be self one, myself would be self two, right? Like like a teller of instructions is telling myself, self two, that's perfect, that doesn't need improvement, that can't be improved upon. I am telling myself that I did something wrong. I'm yelling at myself for something that myself didn't actually do, which is interfered with by this set. So that was interesting. I closed the book and I just thought about that for a bit, and then I don't know what I did after that, but that was all I really needed at that moment. And that was something that maybe I'd never noticed it before, maybe I did, but it never really like sunk into my head of, hey, this is a really, probably one of the more important sentences in this whole book and concepts to really wrap the head around. So with that said, there was also the part of the book talking about the games that people play on the court. So beyond just the outer game of tennis, there's the inner game. So the inner games would be, why are you actually out there playing in the first place, and what tennis actually means to you, or whatever game you're playing means to you. And some of the games that people could play are, seeking perfection. So, like, how good could you possibly be at that? And then you can start to see, all right, well, what would be, some of the ramifications of that? Like, what would be the negative side of that? You can put too much pressure on yourself. You can press. There can be, times where you're just too tied into your image of what you want to be. That when you don't have a good result, or the result that you're looking for, you can react in a certain way that isn't comfortable and isn't necessarily constructive. There's also the games that we could play about social status of, hey, I want to be good at this so that my peers or that people in general see me as a certain way. There's also just the game that you could play of, hey, I just want to go out and have fun. And really, when you break down what games are and what play is, the first time we started playing anything that we may have gravitated to as we got older was usually because it was fun. Like, there's usually some fun element at some level of each game, right? Like, with me playing baseball, like, I loved throwing a ball against my grandparents' house, and I loved throwing it up on the roof and having it come down and catching it. And I loved ground balls, and I loved just playing catch with my dad and having people in my family throw me little wiffle balls for me to hit. And then as I started playing on teams, I loved having teammates, and I loved just being around that. And then, there are elements of that continued to be fun, and then elements that started to be less fun as I started to play different games within my own head. I wasn't there to enjoy it anymore. It was different. So now, with coming kind of full circle, I'm playing in an adult men's league. Like, there was a point where I was getting paid money to play baseball in my life, and I'm not anymore. I paid $350 to play in the league this year, and then bought equipment and bought bats and all that. So I'm not making money. So, okay, why am I doing it? I'm not out there to try to be perfect. I'm not out there to, like, that part of my life is gone. I'm out there just to have fun. I'm out there to enjoy myself. And there have been some moments where I've been, you hit a pop-up or something, and you're like, oh, and that's the part of me that's like, okay, am I getting a little too close to trying to be perfect out there? Am I not looking at this the right way? So with that said, there was an important part that's kind of in there that I don't know, I started to really think about, and I've talked about it a little bit already in this, but just reflections on your own self-worth, right? Like, we're not how well we perform at any given moment. And there are times where you may not be performing well and you're in a slump, and you have to think your way out of it. And not only that, think your way out of, like, hey, how do I get self one to quiet down, to stop giving me all these instructions and stop telling me all these things about, like, how I'm not good, and let self two just show up and have fun again. And that's one thing. Other part that is in chapter 9. So there's only 10 chapters in the book. Chapter 9 talks about the meaning of competition, and competition's always been interesting and part of my life. And what I think really struck me with this, like, one of the few quotes that I really remember, is that true true competition is true cooperation. So with that said, your job as a competitor and your job as an opponent is to make winning for the other person that you're playing against as difficult as possible while staying within the constraints and the confines and the rules of the game. So yeah, you have to play hard. You have to play your hardest. Like, you owe that to the other person. And in that, there's cooperation within that agreement of, hey, I'm going to go play as hard as I possibly can to make this as difficult as possible for you to win. And in that, we're both going to get better. We're both going to start to have a greater appreciation and respect for each other and this game and this life in the moment that we get to share on this court or in this arena or on this field by playing against each other and making this as difficult as possible for each other. You hear of, like, players in the old days, they finish a game and then they go have a drink or they go hang out after. Like, I think that's really what competition at its purest form can look like. And something that I had a stretch in my baseball playing career where that was what it was, and that was great. Like, that was just fun. I had a great time with that. So for me, the cooperation part of competition is huge. Another part is let's see, I kind of got lost in my notes here. Oh, right. So I've got this game tomorrow, and this brings me back to a few questions that maybe I feel like would have benefited me a long time ago, leading up to either any big game or any season or any moment that I may have put more emphasis on. It's, what's the best and what's the worst that can happen from this? So the author tells a story about playing in a tournament where, he had been playing really well at his club, so he signed up for this, regional or, maybe statewide tournament. And he goes and he starts to get nervous, even though he's playing the exact same game that he's always played, and playing against competitors that, may look better but aren't necessarily any better. So with that, he talks about his first game. He should have won, but then the other player can't put him away for whatever reason, and he starts to realize that player's losing his inner game, and he thinks, okay, well, I didn't just win that match, that guy lost, and therefore I won. So before his next match, he starts to get nervous again, and he's like, God, like, what's going on here? So he starts to think, and he's like, all right, what's the best that can happen, or what's the worst that can happen from this? It's like, okay, well, you lose 6-0, 6-0, it's over. Okay, then what? Okay, then you go back to your club, people hear about how you did, they're like, whatever, that guy was good, and then in a week, nobody remembers. Okay, what's the best that can happen? Obviously, you win 6-0, 6-0. You play a few more matches, maybe you lose in the semifinals, or you lose in the finals, or you win in the finals. Then what? Then you go home, everybody says, hey, great job, you must have played hard, you worked hard, awesome. And then in a week, nobody remembers again. So no matter what, it's not like a morbid thing to be like, yeah, nobody was going to remember, but it's like nobody really is going to care that much. And the only real negative that could, like the worst thing that could happen, is tying too much value to the outcome, right? Like saying, hey, if like I am a tennis player, if I lose this, well, I just lost at the thing that I am, right? Like it's a deep statement, but it's also a really quick road to a place I've been before that I didn't like. So with that, what his goal became was to win the inner game, which was to play as well as he could, to make it as difficult for his opponent to win as possible, and to go out there and allow himself to learn more about himself through competition and just enjoy the moment and stay present and win that inner game. Allow himself to go out there and let self too show up to the best of its ability without interfering with it. And I think he ended up losing the next match. It doesn't really matter. But he said he lost, but he felt like he won. And that's huge. The last thing that I kind of wanted to get to was it kind of plays into that last part, just becoming really clear on one's priorities. So if your priority is to only win the outer game, there's a lot of things that kind of go into that. There's a lot of things about winning the outer game that are really out of your control, and being able to accept that there's things that are out of your control is technically part of winning the inner game. So, becoming really, really clear on the priority. For me, the priority tomorrow is that I want to make it as difficult as possible for my opponents to win. I also want to play within the rules and for us to each have a clean game, for everybody to get home safe, for the umpires to get home safe, for us to have fun, and for us to leave the field and be like, damn, that was a good championship game. Like that was awesome. And then whatever happens, happens. I wish I had had that mindset when I was younger. Sure, I'm going to be a little upset if we lose tomorrow. I'm going to be a little happy if we win, but hopefully it's not something that, goes too high or too low on either side. And then there is one story at the very end of the book that I feel is a pretty important one to read. He talks about a near-death experience. I've talked about death now in 2 episodes in a row. And I didn't mean to tie this in. I actually wasn't planning on talking about this, but I did have a star next to it. Talks about how he had a car breakdown in the winter in New England somewhere. He didn't even have like a warmer jacket, and he was on a road that he didn't know. He knew that like the last town he passed was 10 miles behind him. He didn't know how far he had to keep going, so this is like way before GPSs on cars and phones and everything. But basically he just started running a certain direction, and then he realized that he wasn't going to make it that far, that he was probably going to freeze and things weren't going to end well for him. And then a voice in his head told him to actually run the other direction, I think, so he did. And with that, he started realizing that he was running out of fear, and what he started doing after that was just looking around and kind of enjoying how quiet everything was around him, how he could see all the stars, how he was, maybe in a situation that other people wouldn't want to be in. But rather than, he thought, like the feeling of fear while running, he said running with abandon, like toward life, rather than like running from death. He's like, no, I'm going to run back to life and enjoyment. And to me, that really, in some odd way, that hit more than anything else, in the fact that, I remember really clearly the first time, this isn't a humble brag because it's not that impressive, but the first time I broke 80 in golf, which again is the only time I broke 80 in golf, but I remember like getting close to the last few holes and realizing that I was like I could have gone one way or the other and choked and started shanking some shots and hitting balls into the water or out of bounds that immediately would have, like I needed to hit 10 good shots in a row on the final 3 holes. And I hit 10 good shots in a row to finish, and I shot a 79. And it was great. But as I'm there, I'm like, all right, well, what's the worst that can happen? I shank a couple balls. The worst would be like on 18, where I'm like almost there. I miss a putt from 3 feet. But, really the worst would have been losing that inner game. And the best that could have happened was me winning that inner game. And what I did in my head is I was like, I'm just going to play with the band. Like, it doesn't matter. This doesn't matter, not in a nihilistic way, but this doesn't matter in the sense that like it doesn't change anything about, how my wife sees me, how my family sees me, how my friends see me, how my career goes. If I shoot a 79 right here, or if I blow up and shoot a 92, or if I birdie everything and shoot a 77, like it doesn't change anything. Like what I have to do right now is just play because I'm having fun, play with abandon, and like go towards the goal of playing good golf and then allowing myself to naturally get to whatever score I get to here. I mean, hopefully that score is 79 because that'd be cool, and everybody wants to, break certain levels as they start to, improve at something. But for me, it was, okay, how do I just win this inner game? Like, how do I silence everything right now that's telling me, hey, there's water if you hit it short, or hey, there's a bunch of trees over there. That's all self 1. Self 2 is, hey, have I hit a golf ball straight before? Yes. Okay, well, go hit a golf ball straight. Put the image in your head of what that looks like and hit a golf ball. Just hit a golf ball. Take your swing. So for me, the playing with abandon has been something like if I were to put like a word on the bill of a cap right here to like look at and be like, okay, play with abandon. I don't write anything on my cap, but if I were to, people have keywords and people have things that ultimately can be a trap from self 1, just like positive thinking can. It can be a trap. It can be like a technical cue that isn't necessarily that. But to put an awareness cue, or to put, for me, just the word abandon right there is like I know where I have to go in my head, and to think and to do what I want to do out of love for competition and love for the game, and really just love for recreation and competition and enjoyment, that creates where I need to be from a headspace standpoint. So I hope some people got a lot out of that. Inner Game of Tennis, awesome read, pretty quick one. something that I'd recommend for anyone who plays any sort of sport competitively, or just anyone who found any of that to be helpful. I know that for me, there's been a lot of different examples that I feel people can pull no matter what their background is. It's a quick read, and I hope that you got something out of that little book report / summary / story of me talking about baseball, golf, while reading a book about tennis. So thank you, Inner Game of Tennis.